Hi. This video is intended to be a beginner's guide for anybody who's ever wanted to buy and build their own PC. But I have to stress that I'm a beginner too. I'm not an expert, so if you're looking for expert advice, this is not the place to go. But I think over the last 3 months or so, I've learned enough that I'm comfortable enough to do this. So I don't know, I guess we'll kind of find out together if I'm right about that or not. I first got the idea in my head about 3 months ago that I wanted to try building my own PC. At the time, I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know any of the basic parts that went into it, any stuff that you would need, how you build them, what any of this stuff should cost. I spent a lot of time watching videos by actual experts, going through forums, reading product reviews, and just asking people dumb questions until I felt comfortable enough that I finally pulled the trigger, got all the stuff you see in front of you here, and I'm going to try to put it together today, and we'll see how that goes. But first, we'll talk about the basic components that you'll need. First, you'll need a case, you need a power supply, you need your CPU, you need a video card or GPU, you'll need a motherboard, storage drive, memory sticks, and an operating system, in this case Windows 10. I'm just going to go ahead and talk over this while you watch me and my shiny bald head try to put this thing together. And we'll start with the motherboard, which is what I'm working on here. Now, it's really easy to get carried away and spend a lot of money on motherboards, but you really don't have to. Try to think carefully about what it is that you're actually going to be doing with the computer and what kind of components and accessories you might actually need in a motherboard. Some of the things they offer is shielded audio channels, which most people probably aren't going to notice a difference if they have one or if they don't. You can get carried away by spending money on getting multiple PCI Express channels for multiple graphics cards. And again, if you're only going to be running one graphics card, you really don't need to be sinking the extra money into that. Some motherboards are better for overclocking their GPUs and their CPUs. But again, if overclocking isn't something that you're really going to be getting into, then you don't have to be throwing a lot of money at your motherboard. And remember, every time you do save some money on one part of the computer, you can put it into something else that you're really going to notice a difference with. The one thing you really do want to make sure of is just that it's going to fit with all the parts that you're getting. AMD and Intel CPUs, we'll be talking more about that later, they have different sockets, so make sure that your motherboard is going to fit with the CPU that you're using. Also, those memory sticks that we saw earlier. There are a few different kinds of memory sticks, and you're going to want to make sure that you get the right ones for your motherboard. Once you do that, I would say, like pretty much everything else, look for user reviews, make sure you're getting exactly what you need, and you won't be spending too much money on a bunch of crap that you're not actually going to be using. Looks like we're installing the CPU next here. Now when you're choosing your CPU, you're generally going to be choosing between either an Intel or an AMD CPU. Intel seem to be favored more for workstations, video editing, things like that. They are also quite a lot more expensive than the AMD processors. So again, think about what it is that you're actually going to be doing with the computer. If you do need a high-powered workstation, then you'll probably want to be looking at Intel. But if you're just looking at building a gaming rig, and especially if you're working on a budget, then definitely check out what AMD has to offer. And finally, don't get too caught up in buying as many cores as you possibly can for a CPU. If you're putting together a $50,000 editing rig, then chances are you don't need to watch this video. And if you're building an entry-level rig, then honestly I don't think you really need anything more than 4 at this point. Next up is these fancy looking memory sticks here. Now there's generally 2 kinds of RAM sticks. There's DDR3 and DDR4. Which kind you'll be using is going to depend on the CPU that you use. In my case, mine uses DDR3 RAM, so that's what I've used. I wouldn't really worry too much about what this crap is. I don't know what it means, to be honest, anyways. How much you actually need is kind of going to depend on what it is that you'll be doing. If you're going to be building an editing station, then you probably want more RAM. If you're just going to be building a gaming rig, then you probably don't really need much more than 8. There's also going to be a 4-digit number that has something to do with the speed or the frequency. 1600 seems to be a fairly common number, and I think that's probably fine. Again, I wouldn't chuck a whole lot of money at getting the fastest possible RAM that you can. It's not really a difference that you're going to be noticing, and again, this is money that you could probably be putting somewhere else. Now, as we peer over my giant bulbous head getting my case ready, I'll talk a little bit about computer cases. Cases do come in all kinds of sizes and colors and configurations and price ranges. You're going to want to consider the stuff that you'll be putting in the case to make sure it's going to fit first and foremost. In my case, my GPU is really tight in this one, and actually the cooler that I chose does rub against the glass panel on the side of mine, so it all just barely fits. I had previously thought of maybe running two GPUs in the future with this, but honestly, I don't even know if I could fit two of them inside this case, so that's definitely something that you want to consider. Other than that, mainly look at user reviews for cases and just see what people have to say about them. You'll want to think about cable management, where you're going to be running all the wires. And in this one, it's not too bad. I had enough space on the back side that I could kind of mash all these ugly cables in, and the back panel still closed without bulging and ballooning out hideously. Most cases these days have compartments where you can hold your storage drives, and most of them are removable, so if you're not using them, you can take them out. You'll get a little bit more airflow inside. You're going to want to consider if you'll be doing water cooling or liquid cooling in the future or presently in your build. You'll want to make sure your case is going to have a place where you can mount fans and where you can mount your radiator. There's not a whole lot more to it than that. Just find something that you think looks good, make sure it's in your budget, make sure it's going to fit all the stuff that you've selected, and again, check those reviews and make sure what you're buying isn't a steaming pile of crap. Next is the power supply, and that's the thing what supplies power to your PC. With the power supply, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of things I don't really know a whole lot about. When it comes to choosing how many watts your power supply is going to have, I would tend to go a little bit above what you need. It's not going to burn out your system or anything. It's just good to have a little bit of headroom for expansion and just to not have the power supply running at its peak all the time. You will see a lot of power supplies have an 80 plus rating, which is also attached to some kind of a metal, either bronze, gold, silver, platinum. I don't entirely know what that means either. It just has something to do with efficiency, how much power is actually used versus how much is wasted. Generally, it's a good idea to get one that has some kind of rating. It doesn't really matter which one. The one that I've got has a bronze rating. That's fine. Just get one that has some kind of a rating. Also, you really do want to stick to reputable brands on this one. EVGA, Cooler Master, Corsair, just a name brand. You don't have to spend a lot of money on a power supply, but for the love of God, don't cheap out on this. Buy something that's decent quality. A lot of power supplies these days come with long warranties, 3-year, 5-year, 7-year. I think this one comes with a 5-year warranty. And generally, that's going to be the lifetime of the power supply. When the warranty runs out, then it's time to look at getting another one. Most power supplies these days, you'll see, are either going to be modular or semi-modular. What that means is all of the cables aren't hardwired into the actual thing. You just plug in the ones that you need and you ignore the ones that you don't. It's quite nice because it means your build is going to be a lot cleaner inside and you're not going to have a whole lot of useless wires cluttering up your build. And again, like everything else, check the user reviews on these ones. Make sure you get one that's going to last, that's not going to burn out your PC. You don't want one that's going to make you wake up on fire one morning. Just, get a decent power supply. I was kind of surprised to find out that optical drives for reading and burning CDs and DVDs have become optional these days, but they really have. So that's something to keep in mind, mainly when you're shopping for a case, because not all cases these days have room for them. In my case, my operating system comes on a DVD, and I have a few kicking around the house that I still want to use, so I decided to go ahead and buy one. You don't have to spend a lot of money on these. You can get these things really cheap, especially when they're on sale. So off camera here, I'm fiddling with my HDD. That's the storage drive. Another option would be to get an SSD, which is a solid state drive. Those things are really, really expensive though. The advantage is that SSDs are really, really fast. Another cheaper option that would give you really fast boot times is to buy a smaller capacity SSD and just load your operating system on that, and then use a standard HDD as a storage drive. I didn't do that, but that's always something you could upgrade to in the future. Next up on the menu is your CPU cooler. Now most CPUs do come with a cooler, and to be honest, I kind of wish they didn't, because for the most part they're just cheap pieces of crap that aren't really going to cut it anyways. Frankly, I'd rather just save a few bucks on the CPU and just have them send it without. Now, the one that I've got here is a fairly standard air cooler. These are also quite cheap too. I think this one was about 20 or 30 bucks. You can also get into liquid cooling, but that's mainly if you're going to be overclocking your CPU and going to be generating a lot of heat. Liquid cooling, again, you're also going to need a radiator for that, and you're going to need space in your case for that as well. But for just starting out, a normal cooler like the one that I've got here is going to be perfectly fine and a fairly inexpensive way to get started. Liquid cooling is an upgrade you could always do later on. It's quite a lot more expensive than these air coolers. You'll definitely want to check out user reviews for these ones though, because you do not want to have liquid leaking all over your motherboard and your GPU and all this expensive fancy stuff that you just bought. And next up is the GPU, or the video card. And this is the big one. This should really represent the most expensive component in your build. It should make up roughly 40% of your total budget. When it comes to choosing one, I would say figure out what your budget is and then kind of start looking at them from there. You will want to consider what resolution you'll be working in, 1080p, 2K, 4K. If you want to be going up in those higher resolutions, you're going to be spending a lot of money on a really expensive card. You can go to YouTube and check out all kinds of benchmarking videos comparing different cards to find out which ones are going to give you the best frame rates. You can check user reviews to figure out which ones are noisy, which ones run hot. And the amount of overclockability is something to consider if that's a thing that you really want to get into. But ultimately, do shop around, try to figure out exactly what it is that you actually need and what you really want, because this is really going to have the most effect on the performance of your computer, especially if you're going to be building a gaming PC. You will also want to consider what you're pairing this with as far as a CPU is concerned. If you buy a really powerful video card but a really crappy and weak CPU, then you're going to get what's called bottlenecking, which basically just means that the power of your GPU is going to be strangled by the weak processor. And again, it's pretty easy to find out which ones are compatible. Look at user reviews, read forums for both the CPU and the GPU, and find out what combinations people are putting together, and you'll figure out what's going to work best for you. And there it is, all lit up and looking all shiny and pretty like. All in all, this build was actually really easy. I didn't have any trouble when I was putting the parts physically together. I turned the computer on and it booted up just like it was supposed to. It was easy to get Windows installed on it and all my drivers going. And yeah, it's been a really fun experience. If you've ever thought about putting your own PC together, I'd highly recommend it. You can save a lot of money over buying a pre-built computer, and this has been a really fun experience for me. And as someone who has no experience at this, it hasn't been all that hard either. I hope this video has been of some help for people. Again, I can't stress enough that I'm not an expert at this, but I hope this is at least a good starting point for you to give you a vague idea of the basics. That's all for now, and have fun with your PC.